Hey guys, what's going on? My name is Joe and welcome to a video about trading in Team Fortress 2. And this is going to be something that I get asked fairly frequently. More and more people are sort of starting to buy unusuals for the first time. They're starting to trade their way up to an unusual, and I mean it's fairly obvious to say that a lot of people don't actually know what to look for when buying an unusual, and it's more than likely that at one point during trading someone is going to end up getting stuck with an unusual for months due to the fact they simply can't sell it because they've bought an unusual that simply isn't desirable. So in this video I'm going to be making 5 things to look out for, so key things to look out for when buying an unusual, and this is going to be things that make an unusual desirable and mean that more people are most likely going to buy it or accept offers including the unusual. So I really do hope this does help as many of you as possible, and without further ado, let's get straight into the video. So this is going to be fairly obvious for most people out there, and it's something that I don't find hugely relevant, but sadly a lot of traders out there do, and that's going to be to make sure that the item is clean and not duped. Personally, as I said, I don't care about dupes. If your item's duped, I couldn't really care less because it doesn't affect anything aesthetically. It's just the fact that duped hats have a sort of negative stigma around them. With this being said, I made a video on how to check if an unusual is duped, so I'll be sure to drop that down in the description below for you guys to check out. But it's pretty important because it really sucks when you're negotiating a trade and they ask if it's clean, you say it isn't clean, it's duped, and they say they're no longer interested. It really does suck, and I've experienced it far too many times, so unfortunately that is probably one of the most important things you should be looking out for. So as I said, there will be a full tutorial to that down in the description below. It's really simple and a really sort of effective way to check if the item is duped. So let's go on to the second point. So the next thing you should take into consideration when buying an unusual is check how many there are on the market. I'm going to show you an example now of what exactly wouldn't be the best thing to see when you're looking for this, and what would be a much more appropriate thing to sort of look out for and go out of your way to check when buying an unusual. So let's take the smoking bombing run for example. As we can see, there are 3 already on the backpack.tf classified listings, 2 of which for below backpack.tf price. We head over to TF2 Outpost and we can see 3 more for sale, only 1 of which is the same person as backpack.tf. So that's 5 individual sellers on a smoking bombing run. And that's pretty bad when you're looking to sell one, because it means there's 5 other people in contention with you also looking to sell the same hat. What's going to make a buyer go out of their way to purchase your one for a higher price than someone else's on the market? Another issue when there's multiple versions of the same hat is that generally there could be a lot of undercutting. I experienced this back when I had a Green Energy Killer exclusive, in where there would be quite a few on the market and everyone wanted to be the cheapest, so there's more of a chance of someone buying it. So people would generally cut their price lower than the person before them, and it gets into a continuous cycle where hats are continuously sort of degrading in price, and it does become a bit tricky to sell for a decent price. So that's definitely something to look out for. Make sure the market isn't overly saturated with the same version of your unusual. Now this next one is probably not going to be something that's likely to affect a lot of people, but it does happen fairly frequently to me and I know how it feels, so I just want to cover this in case it ever does happen. And this is going to be, make sure your unusual isn't really going to drop in price. It isn't in a situation where it can get suggested to sort of go down in price because there's been a lot of sales in the past. And the best way to do this is to buy an unusual that's price has recently been changed. So I'm going to head over to backpack.tf now. So let's take the whoopee cap for example. I'm not going to notice anything in particular, I'm just going to show you what to look out for. So as you can see here, we can see the price in ref, keys and dollars. The red triangle means that it was priced over 3 months ago. Whenever an unusual is priced at 3 months and above, it's considered outdated. So the chances are, if it's from 3 months ago, it's probably at risk of getting a price suggestion for it made sooner or later. This couldn't happen, there's unusuals out there that haven't been priced in 3 years, but generally, I mean, I've just been really unlucky with it, maybe because sort of people know who I am, but most of the unusuals I end up owning do get suggested fairly frequently. So if it has a red down arrow, that means its price has recently been changed and decreased since the last time it was priced, so it's gone down in price. The green arrow means that it's recently been changed, however it's gone up in price since the price that it was previously. I said price a lot of times then. But essentially, as long as your unusual has a red arrow or green arrow next to it, it means that it isn't going to get repriced anytime soon. And it's just something that, I mean, I wouldn't necessarily say it's vital to look out for, but it's definitely important because you don't want to get an unusual for a good deal and wake up the next day to see a price suggestion on it where it's going to drop for less than you paid. So one thing that you should definitely take into consideration is the generation of your effect. I personally don't really care too much about this again. I think if it looks nice, it shouldn't really matter. However, I'll leave a link down below to a forum, or a forum post actually, that details what generations are the different generation effects. Generally, it's best to avoid effects after 3rd gen, so things like Miami Nights, Disco Beatdown, and then sort of the new Halloween effects of Starstorm Slumber and things like that are probably best to avoid, just purely because new effects seem to have a sort of stigma surrounding them that suggests that they are fairly tricky to trade. I personally don't mind about this, but it's definitely something to keep your eyes open for when buying an unusual, because if you buy like a kilowatt hat, for example, people are going to probably prefer buying like a peace sign, or maybe like an orbiting fire or a stormy storm, more just purely because it has less of a negative stigma around it, and it's not surrounded by the fact that it is hard to trade. So do keep an eye out if you're starting unusual trading. You don't want to get stuck with an unusual that may be really tricky to trade, so avoid effects like Kilowatt, Starstorm Slumber, Neutron Star, things like that if you are just starting out, because they're not too hard to trade, but if you aren't very experienced, it's probably best to avoid them because they do take time. And the last thing I'm going to be speaking about in this video is going to be make sure that the unusual effect price isn't too out of proportion to everything else. I'm going to head over to backpack.tf and show you an example of what I mean. What I mean by this is make sure your nuts and bolts bombing run isn't priced higher than a Birmingham bombing run. That's completely hypothetical, and as I said, I will show you a real example now, but it's definitely something to look out for. Okay, so let's take a look at this unusual Dr. Dapper's topper. As you can see, the effects have been sorted in order of price, meaning the most expensive is at the top and the cheapest are at the bottom. So we can see Sulfurous here is priced at 115 keys. The partner effect of Sulfurous, being Phosphorus, is priced at 80 keys. Sulfurous is most likely going to be considered a bit overpriced. By that, what I mean is not only can you get its partner effects for 35 keys cheaper, but you can also get effects like Knife Storm, Poison Shadows, Stormy 13th Hour, Green Black Hole, Circling Heart, Haunted Ghosts, which are all considered better and higher tier than Sulfurous for a cheaper price. So if you get an unusual effect that's severely out of proportion to the rest of them, such as Sulfurous on the Dr. Dapper's topper, it may be a bit more tricky to trade. So that's definitely something to look out for and to kind of keep in mind when looking at your effect. Make sure that in the rest of the sort of tiered effect that it is in place. So like for example, Terawatt and like all these other 3rd gens are priced roughly the same. So make sure it's sort of in proportion to the rest of the effects. But guys, that's just about it for this video. If it did help you or teach you anything that you didn't know, be sure to hit that like button and let me know what you thought down in the comment section below. Thank you all so much for watching guys, and peace.